Okay, we'll go ahead and get this meeting started. If we can do a roll call, please.
Councilmember Perales.
Here.
Councilmember Jimenez.
Here.
Carrasco. Vice Mayor Jones.
Here.
Sylvia Reynos. We have a quorum.
Thank you. And our first item is the review of our work plan. We do have one item here recommended to be deferred. And there's no other changes. We can a motion and a second to accept that.
So moved. Second.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
None opposed. Motion passes. We will now go down to nothing on consent, actually, so we'll go right to D1, our Police Department Operations and Performance Bimonthly Status Report. Welcome. Yeah, I don't know if I can help with that. Our IT guy might be in the back. I'm assuming you have a presentation ready and loaded, but
Yeah, I do. Can't wait to see it.
we'll pause for a second. We'll see if we can't get them up here.
Good afternoon. My name is Lieutenant Paul Cook. I am the Research and Development Unit Commander for the San Jose Police Department, and I'm here today to present the San Jose Police Department Bimonthly Operations and Performance Status Report. As is our tradition, we will start with citywide crime statistics based on UCR Part 1 crimes. This will be the first bimonthly in which we present a standardized report out on sexual assault numbers that will include a 5-year trend, as well as updates on the work items that were created over the summer. Under other matters of interest, we're going to be doing a prostitution update focused on street-level prostitution. So if we look at our Part 1 crimes here, what you'll see is because this is our February report, we have all 12 months of 2019 to compare against. So ultimately are comparing the entire year of 2019 against 2018. You'll see that homicides are up 21.4% compared to 2018, but as we've mentioned before, 2018 was an unusually low year, and actually 34 is right on the 5-year average. So we don't actually have an increase when you consider the 5-year average. The rape numbers reported out under UCR Part 1 continue to increase on the same general trend that we've been seeing for the last 4 or 5 years, with a 9.1% increase. Robberies are down 15.9% over 2018, but they're actually almost spot on for the 5-year average. Our aggravated assault continued to increase, and you can see that both in the 14% increase over 2018 and in this year's comparison to the 5-year average. Overall, we've got a 2.6% increase in violent crimes over 2018. When we look at the property offenses, our burglary rates continue to decline, both compared against the year before with a 9.4% drop and compared against the 5-year average. Our larceny rates continue to increase. They're up 10% over 2018. And our vehicle theft is down 20% over 2018, which is a true drop, even if you compare that against the 5-year numbers. So overall, 2019 saw a 1.6% drop in UCR Part 1 crimes. Which brings me to the sexual assault bimonthly report out. So we're going to start with looking at these 8 categories that account for what we report to UCR as rape under Part 1. So these are the 8 state of California sex assault crimes that categorize that, to make up that category. And if you look at the totals, you'll see that there's a general, the totals in the bottom line there, you'll see that there's a general upward trend over the last 5 years. And perhaps I should back up a bit here. It's going to be my pattern as we do this every 2 months to report to you this period in the year against the same time frame from the 5 years previous. So again, because we're at the end of the year, I'm able to show you all 12 months of 2019 and compare that against all 12 months of 15 through 18. And so you see an interesting trend in the totals. It's a very steady incline that has been doing about the same amount of increase year over year since 2015. The rape, 261 of the Penal Code, it has been following a similar trend with a steady incline over the last 5 years. Sodomy had a slight drop in 2016, but then has continued on a similar upward trend. Some interesting numbers. The first one, the attempted sex assault, actually saw a drop in 2019, a significant drop over 2017 and 18. And the crime of oral copulation has also seen a slight plateau in 2018 with a bit of a drop in 2019. If you look at the rape category for spouse and for domestic, and if you look at attempted assault under domestic and foreign objects, well, actually the first 3, we've seen some interesting both spikes and drops in those areas, but all 3 of those categories are real small number cases, so it's really hard to make good comparisons and to drive policy off of those when we're only talking about numbers like 4 versus 1 in the year before. Rape domestic has been kind of had a real low drop in 2018, but the 2019 numbers are more in line with the trend. The other part of the bimonthly sexual assault report out is going to deal with the work items that were assigned over the course of the summer. We have 17 items that were assigned to the San Jose Police Department and 6 items that were more apropos to the countywide work items. So I'm going to present you with these simple pie charts here just to kind of characterize how we're doing on our progress on those. So if you look at SJPD items, the green category indicates items that have been fully implemented, while the blue is items that we are currently working on and in progress towards implementing, and the red categories are categories of items that we have not yet been working on. So the countywide items will be using the same color coding, and you'll see there's a significant difference in our ability to get our work items done. With the in-house stuff, we've been making some progress on, and we're still working with slightly different rates for the countywide items. On the next slide, I'm actually breaking that down by item. These are the 17 items that were presented to the San Jose Police Department. And if you look at, I've used the same color codes to indicate what's implemented, what's in progress, and what is pending. We have several items there, two items, the last 2 items in the green category, the vigilant parent training and the trauma-informed approach for detectives. Those are long-term training courses that are offered in multiple presentations. So I'm marking those as implemented. The Vigilant Parent Training Project has been designed, created, implemented, and they are having regular deliveries of that will continue through May. So although we haven't delivered every session of it, it's happening. So I put that in the implemented category. We're in the same status with the trauma-informed approach for detectives, where those courses are currently being delivered. The development is fully complete, and we're in the delivery process of that. We're getting close to delivering on trauma-informed for all other officers. It's essentially almost the same delivery, the course that we'll be delivering, but we're not going to begin for all officers until we finish delivering to all detectives. This is a similar chart for countywide sex assault work items. You'll see that we have formalized a sexual assault working group with the county, and we are nearing completion on the Child Advocacy Center that we've been working on as a countywide project to get that particular project fully up and running. As far as a follow-up meeting between this committee and the Santa Clara County Committee on Children, Seniors, and Families, we've reached out, city administration's reached out to the county on that, and their new work group is in the process of formulating their work plan, and so we're hoping that they'll get back to us with some proposed dates for you shortly. And one of the other things I'm going to do to kind of close out this bi-monthly report is just talk about the items that have been of note during the last 2 months. And of course, this is reaching back a little further because this is our first time doing this. But we've formalized the SART committee, and actually the county has done that, and we're joining in as a law enforcement agency. Law enforcement, DA, SART, Crime Lab, and our community-based organizations are all working together with the SART committee to formalize and standardize processes. There was a report out to the council on this on January 9th, and there will be a follow-up on March 12th. We talked a lot over the summer about Clearance Code K for lack of investigative resources and the way we were classifying that, creating a lot of confusion. Starting on the 1st of January, and we did this on the 1st of January so that we can have good data as far as having that for a full year and not mixing different clearance codes in different years. So starting on the 1st of January, we now have added G and H so that if we really genuinely do not have the investigative resources to conduct an investigation, we can classify that as K. But if this is something where either the victim is requesting that we close it or the victim is simply failed to continue interacting with us, is no longer participating, that we can characterize those in their own clearance codes that will give us a better idea of why we're clearing these cases. The vigilant parent training, as I talked about, is occurring now and should cycle through in May. On the 25th of January, we implemented a domestic violence sexual assault intersection tool. And this is a tool where officers who respond to domestic violence cases or investigations have a pre-designated list of questions that we're going to ask of the survivor in that case, where we're trying to query out whether there have also been sexual assaults associated with that relationship. It's pretty common knowledge there's a lot of intersectionality there, and we want to be sure that we're capturing all those, and that in the event that we do discover those, that those get properly reported and then assigned to the appropriate investigator. So we created a set of protocols for how to do that, as well as the templates and the forms, and that's all been in place since the 25th of January. And as I mentioned earlier, we've already begun our trauma-informed training for detectives. And with that, I'm going to move on to the other matter of interest for this bi-monthly, and that is going to be prostitution. In fact, we're going to focus mostly on street-level enforcement, street-level prostitution. And if you look at that map on the screen, you'll see that the first street corridor, First and Monterey Highway, between, say, 280 and Alma Avenue is where you see most of our incidents of street-level prostitution. This is nothing new. This has been the case for probably the 3 decades I've been here. This has been the case. So this is, when we talk about street-level prostitution in the next several slides, we're going to be talking about this area in general. There will be some incidents that occur, as you see, there's some incidents on the outskirts. There are some incidents in various other places, but they don't amount to a statistically significant number of events. We really are talking about this neighborhood when we talk about our efforts. And as we've said before, we were here in 2018 talking about this, and really this is the effects of this on the community have to do with the associated criminal activity that surrounds the prostitution that's going on in the neighborhood. This can be everything from beer bottles left behind, or used condoms, or paraphernalia from drugs to either the prostitutes or the Johns being robbed or kidnapped or some other crime of violence. So it spans a big area of the associated criminal activity. The associated reference, I think, speaks for itself. When we were here last time, there was a lot of talk about people in the neighborhood being solicited, and this could be fathers coming home, this can be mothers walking their children to school. So the solicitation of passersby has been a big deal for the people who live in the areas impacted by this, as has exposure to the neighborhood youth and the challenges that that presents to the stability of families in the area. In the previous presentation back in November of 2018, we really got three big significant outcomes of that presentation. One was that there were a number of residents who were here in front of the committee asking for increases in enforcement. And the committee spoke very clearly to us here at the police department and asked for more uniform data ranges, and as well as challenged us to increase the number of arrests of the prostitution buyers, or in other words, the Johns. So you're going to see as I make my presentation how we've tried to address each of those three areas. In fact, if you look at our general strategy for 2019, we've continued to do what we were previously doing, in that we were sending out prostitution enforcement teams, we were providing resource to the survivors, and that we continue to have an open invitation to our community-based organizations to participate and to help the survivors coming out of this. So we continue these efforts, but we have also added the Report John project. We're getting about 3 reports per week. In addition, there's some other groups who are, this is also, Report John also happens on a community-based organization area, so I don't think we're getting all of them. I think some of them are going to some of the nonprofit groups that also run similar projects, but we are getting 3 tips per week on our line. We've increased our number of prostitution teams. We did that about the middle of the year. And then we've instituted John Decoy. And I'll talk a little bit later about the amount of effort it takes to set up a John Decoy. But we've started instituting that kind of late in 2019, and we've been running that twice a month since September. And if you just look at the current conditions that are out there, we've had feedback from the residents, and we've had feedback from the officers who are out working. And the residents that are, in fact, our most recent meeting about this with the Washington Guadalupe Neighborhood Association, we actually had residents telling us that they've seen improvements and they'd like us to continue doing what we're doing. And it's really nice to go out and get that feedback, because that is not the feedback we were getting in 2017 and in the beginning of 2018. So we're really proud of that. Within the department, I've spoken with officers who are working on these enforcement teams, and what they've observed in the last half of 2019 is that there are just fewer prostitutes being seen working in that neighborhood. And that's pretty consistent with our arrest rates have decreased in the second half of that year, just because we have fewer candidates as we go out and try to do enforcement out there in the area. So here's some arrest trends. And what I've done is I've taken all of the women arrested for prostitution, men arrested for prostitution. I've also broken down women arrested for a crime of the crime that's categorized as loitering for the purpose of solicitation or prostitution. I shortened that to just loitering. So we've arrested both men and women for loitering, and then we've made pimping arrests as well. And these figures do not include prostitution arrests that we've made in human trafficking or massage parlor operations. And the reason I've parsed those out is to try to get at, what is the street level picture in San Jose right now. And this, pardon me, and to recognize that this is citywide data, although as I mentioned earlier, the overwhelming majority of this comes off the First Street Monterey Highway corridor. The other thing that's interesting in gathering this data is that when you look at the crime of 647B of the Penal Code, that is the same crime that we charge a person who's the buyer in a prostitution transaction or the seller in a prostitution transaction. So it's hard by looking at those numbers to tell for certain who is the prostitute and who is the John when you just look at the arrest numbers. To really pull that out, you have to read the report. And we're looking at over 1,500 incidents here. So I did not go through and read all of those reports. But what I can tell you is that overwhelmingly, the number of women being arrested for prostitution are working as prostitutes, and the number of men being arrested for prostitution are working as Johns. And there are some very limited examples. I was speaking with the enforcement teams about this, and they could think of somewhere between 5 and a dozen circumstances last year where the genders were switched. But as you look at these numbers, if you think of the women working in the prostitution role, the men working in the John role, that would be a very consistent way of looking at these numbers. 2017, we didn't have nearly as many arrests for men or women for prostitution. They increased in 2018. That's consistent with us implementing our prostitution enforcement teams. And then you'll see in 2019, the number of men arrested for prostitution goes up and the number of women go down. And that's because we're refocusing some of our energies on the Johns in particular. And so as the prostitution activity in the area decreases, we have fewer prostitutes in that neighborhood, and therefore you see fewer arrests for women, but we continue with the John enforcement operations and the numbers of men being arrested goes up. The loitering numbers are very different from the prostitution numbers. That has to do with the nature of how that enforcement occurs. Typically when you go out, the loitering section prohibits people loitering in an area for the purpose of soliciting prostitution, whether they are a man or a woman. When you see the prostitute typically is stationary or on foot, this is just kind of the common practice, and the men are typically in vehicles. And so it's reasonably easy for an enforcement team that is out doing a stakeout, watching people in the neighborhood who they think are involved, to see a stationary pedestrian making contact with multiple passing vehicles. And when they make contact with multiple passing vehicles, vehicles with single men in them, that is starting to feed into the elements of the crime of a person who is soliciting for prostitution or loitering for that purpose. So it's reasonably straightforward to make an arrest on the person who's selling under that circumstance. Whereas the men who are passing in the vehicles, it isn't until you see a John make multiple circles in that vehicle that person starts closing in on meeting the requirements for that arrest. And oftentimes they will pass through, they will make contact, and then they will move on and keep going. And the enforcement teams have to choose in that moment whether they're going to follow that vehicle to see what it does and lose track of the person they've been watching or not. And so you'll see that the nature of what elements meet that crime of loitering are what drive those very significant difference in numbers that you're seeing between men and women. I've pulled out the pandering arrests and just left the pimping arrests in. The pandering arrests tend to be more of our human trafficking work and our massage parlor work. You'll see those numbers are pretty low. It's hard to make a case against a pimp without the cooperation of the prostitute that's being pimped. And so when the prostitute is willing, we're always trying to get that because we'd much rather arrest the pimp than the prostitute if we can. So when the prostitutes are cooperative with us in that area and want to help give evidence against the pimp and explain how the pimp is working, then we actually don't prosecute that prostitute. We treat that prostitute as our witness, and then we go out and we arrest a pimp. So, but you'll see that just by the nature of that entire dynamic between them, we don't get a lot of opportunities to do that. We take advantage of every one we can get, but the numbers are quite a bit lower. This is just kind of a breakout of how we've changed our enforcement protocols between 2017, 18, and 19. Our typical practice in 2018 was to send out our prostitution enforcement team. And this is a group of officers, either in plain clothes or in uniform, who are observing activity in the neighborhood and are taking enforcement based on the observations they make. And so they arrest both prostitutes and Johns. They account for the majority of our loitering for the purpose of prostitution arrests come from the teams that are out observing the activity on the street. We've increased the number of teams that are doing that in 2018 and again in 2019. And in late 2019, as I mentioned earlier, we have started running our John decoy operations. This is different in the sense that we're putting an officer, a female officer, out on the street as a decoy to solicit Johns. And that puts them at risk for all those associated crime things that we mentioned earlier, for them being a victim of that. So it takes a lot of resources to do that in a way that protects the safety of our fellow officer as much as we can and still has the capacity to arrest the John. So it's a very labor-intensive process, and so that's why you see us doing it less frequently. But we typically get a lot of arrests out of each incident that we do because we can run that for several hours and pick up John after John after John. So this is an interesting data point that you saw in 2018. You saw the classification of where arrestees are residing by county. So if you look at 2017, 2018, these numbers are slightly different than what you saw last time we visited. Last time we visited, we took these from a county report based on prosecutions. And what the data you're looking at right now comes from San Jose arrest report figures. So the numbers are slightly different, but they do trend towards the same thing. And what you're seeing is Santa Clara County is in blue, and you see that Santa Clara County residents only account for anywhere between a quarter and a third of the people who are being arrested for this. And what you're seeing, the other 2/3 or 3/4, and this has been consistent year over year, are coming from out of the county. Alameda County and Sacramento County are our biggest contributors, and a trend that we are seeing in 2019 is fewer from Alameda County and Sacramento, and a greater increase in people that are just scattered from other counties or from other states. I think this is just kind of interesting to see that the more enforcement we do in our region, how does that affect people who are coming from out of the area? Do they know how much enforcement we're doing? And does this present a potential in the future for some proactive work to try to prevent this activity? We're not doing that now, but it's an interesting data point, and I just wanted to share that with you as a follow-up for some data you saw last time. There have been some law changes in 2020 that are going to affect our efforts. The state legislature has decriminalized several elements of this. We no longer have the courts no longer have the ability to suspend a person's driver's license if they use a car in the course of a prostitution arrest. They used to be able to suspend a license for 30 days if they were using a car and they were within so many feet of a residential area. That is no longer, and honestly, that was generally the Johns who were driving the cars. And so we're no longer able to suspend the Johns' driver's licenses. I suspect that was a good deterrent for recidivism, but that deterrent factor is no longer available to us. Code 647.3 of the Penal Code prohibits us from arresting someone for prostitution if that violator was the victim of a serious crime during the sex transaction. So if during a prostitution transaction there is a victim of a deadly assault or rape or a kidnapping or there's a series of sections listed in the Penal Code that we wouldn't arrest that person for prostitution while we're also trying to take care of them as a victim of a crime. We don't think this one is really going to affect our day-to-day activities because this is already in line with the values of this department, and I don't think this is going to have any effect on what we're doing. Possession of condoms, the same section, a different subsection of 647.3, now says that we can no longer consider possession of condoms as a factor in justifying an arrest. In the evidence code, there's another section that says you can't use them, you can't introduce the possession of condoms as evidence when making a prostitution prosecution. We've had a long-standing practice in this department of not seizing the condoms, but noting them and considering that as a factor when making a decision for arrest. We can no longer consider that as a factor. And these are just some statutory changes from the state legislature. And I think it's going to be a little while before we understand how or if this affects our overall picture in San Jose. I'm going to wrap up here with some takeaways. We're continuing to offer and provide assistance to the sex worker, recognizing that there's got to be, an intervention moment, and that the more resources we can provide to that person, the more likely we can intervene and make better outcomes for the survivor and reduce the activity in the neighborhood. So win-win. We've been also increasing our enforcement, particularly against sex buyers. 2019 was big, where we're trying to increase our presence in the sex buyer enforcement area. Both the officers and the residents have observed a decrease in activity. That's supported by our arrest rates. And I think the important thing here is we don't consider this to have been a win just because we're getting ahead now. We have to continue to press our advantage. If you go back to the slide where you look at how many people are coming from out of town, they may not know that we're getting ahead on this. And the only way we're going to continue to retain our advantage is to be there when people come from out of town to buy or sell. And so we're going to continue to press the field. And with that, I'm open for questions.
Thank you very much. Any questions from my colleagues? I'll go over here to Vice Mayor Jones.
Thank you, Chair. I want to go, first of all, back to the overall crime statistics and touch on let's see.
I apologize. That's going to be slide 4.
So would vehicle break-ins be categorized under burglary, or what would be the?
No, so they fall into the larceny
Okay.
category. They're called car clouts, and under UCR definitions, because from state to state, the definition of burglary is different. So UCR burglary is your traditional burglary of a business or a home.
Okay, because that definitely clarifies things for me, because just like in my district, throughout the city, throughout the region, there's just been this, we're in a crisis mode in terms of vehicle break-ins.
Yes, sir.
City of Sunnyvale had 43 in one day. I know I came from a community meeting where I walked down the street, and I literally, car after car after car, had that mound of glass where they had broken the windows. And it's a constant, get constant feedback and complaints. So I see that number has gone up 10%. Are car break-ins the main driver of that increase? And if so, well, that's question number one. Question number two is, do we feel that we're actually getting all the reports, or are people actually reporting the number of incidents that are taking place? Because just based on my observations, that number should be much higher, just on the amount of activity just in my district alone. And I'm sure my counterparts can tell a similar story.
With regard to your first question, I think car break-ins are likely to be driving that, although I'll be honest with you, I haven't parsed out the numbers on that to figure out how many of those are car clouts and how many of those are other kinds of larceny. So I can't give you a definitive answer on your first question, although it stands to reason that I've been in front of the committee the last few times and this has come up, and so I know it's a citywide problem. With regard to the number of reports, again, it's a difficult question to answer. Are they all being reported to us or not? Because we don't really know what we don't know.
Right.
Although traditionally we recognize that the car break-ins is an area where we have a hard time getting high levels of reporting because not everyone believes that it will do them much good to make the report, and they just kind of get on with their corrective measures. So I suspect we're not getting them all, but I wouldn't be able to quantify that.
All right. And then as far as the rape statistics, we have it broken down by rape, rape spouse, and rape partner.
On slide number 6, yes, sir.
Do we also, how come we don't break out acquaintance, rape by acquaintance versus?
The reason behind, I apologize.
Oh, no.
Okay.
Go ahead.
So the reason behind that is that there isn't, a rape by acquaintance falls into the general rape category based on California statute. So these 8 categories are driven by the different California statutes that feed into the UCR Part 1 reporting of rape. When we go back and look at our data, we look at the crime statute that is in the report that is made to us, as opposed to going back and reading the details of all 1,500 reports, right? And so there's more than 1,500 here. So of going back and reading the details of each report. So it's convenient from a data analysis perspective to measure it by what statutes already exist in California. If we wanted to know how many of these rapes were acquaintance versus stranger rapes, that would be a different analysis that we could do, but it just wasn't it isn't driven by statute and therefore wasn't part of the plan for today's presentation.
I was just wondering from a strategic standpoint, if it would make sense to do that type of analysis, because you might have a different strategy in terms of prevention or arrest or incarceration with that, if you identify it specifically if it's an acquaintance rape versus a stranger rape.
Understood. You know, stranger rapes really do make up for a very small percentage of it, and I believe some of those numbers may have been presented in the study session this summer. I just don't have them with me.
Great. And then, and finally on prostitution, would it be safe to say that the vast majority of the prostitutes are victims of human trafficking, or would that be too much of a broad statement?
I think that's a reasonable assessment to make. If they're working with a pimp, I think the way we characterized human trafficking 10 or 15 years ago was very different from the way we characterize it today. And I think that by today's standards, that's a fair assessment, sir.
So wouldn't that also drive your strategy in terms of how you deal with the prostitutes and arrests and support and all the other services that you would provide to a victim of human trafficking versus a straight arrest?
Yes, and it's a different protocol for implementing those resources when we're talking about street level versus massage parlor versus brothels. In a massage parlor or a brothel, it's pretty easy to figure out who's running that operation and that person is ostensibly the human trafficker. Whereas when we're working with street level prostitution, it's oftentimes very difficult to even locate or identify the potential pimp and or to get the prostitute to come forward with that. There will, of course, be some prostitutes who are out independently operating. And it's real hard for us to tell how many are independent and how many are working for a pimp, which would then get them into the human trafficking classification. Because for the most part, they don't want to share that information with us. We still want to share resources with them, and we do, but we present them in a different way just because the environments are very different.
Thank you. That's all the questions I have.
Thank you, Councilmember Dennis.
Thank you. So I just first want to just commend you by saying that this is a great report, and I really took advantage of the standardized data format that you have to appreciate the numbers that you're presenting. I think in the past we've seen different timeframes being reported, and it was difficult to kind of follow the trend. This is really laying it out clearly for all of us, and so we can appreciate these issues and these numbers a lot better. So thank you for doing that. My first question is about the burglary unit. I see that there's a decrease in burglary and then a decrease in robbery. Do you attest these decreases in numbers to having an established burglary unit, or is there more undercover operations? I'm sure you don't want to give us too much, so that way we can keep people guessing in terms of what is best or more effective. But just wondering, because very anecdotally, when we go out into our community, burglaries are always the number one concern for our residents, and they're happy to hear that we're responding to every alarm here on. But I don't know if it's exasperated because of next door and the way that people are reporting it to each other, and maybe it just seems like it's more than what it is. And so, could you tell us a little bit more about how that came about?
Well, we really do believe that our decrease in burglary is a function of having created the Burglary Prevention Unit. We've been before the committee a number of times talking about the existence of that work group and the work that they do in both trying to improve burglary prevention and in going out and locating and arresting burglars. And when you go out and locate and arrest a burglary, you're oftentimes getting a crew of burglars out of it because they're working in teams, so to speak. Now, that definitely, that new work group, we absolutely think amounts to going burglaries from, completely changing the trend, from skyrocketing to dropping. Right? And whether or not that influenced our robbery drop, or also I think you should look at the vehicle theft drop. Right? That there's a lot of crossover between the people who are doing burglary crews, and some crossover to robberies, and a lot of crossover to vehicle theft. So although our burglary prevention unit isn't working per se on vehicle theft or robbery, and now we're getting into speculation, but it's reasonable to suspect that by taking those crews off the street, that impacts those two other crime sets.
So there's a crossover between...
I think there's absolutely a crossover, but it's almost impossible to quantify.
Sure, okay. Yeah, I did see the vehicle theft lowered, although when I met with our captain, I think it was last month, we haven't had a chance to meet just yet this month, the vehicle thefts were still up in our area, and mainly because of Eastridge Mall, and I know that our captain increased his efforts at Eastridge Mall to make sure that, he was preventing some or interrupting at least some of those, and I think that was very effective. Usually malls are number one places of target. So I hope that's part of also the vehicle theft, although we haven't really seen a decrease. And we're just coming out of the holiday season, so that might also be it, right? People expect to have more packages inside the cars and more things to take from our particular area around Eastridge, but I think overall I'm seeing this is 20% less citywide.
So actually, when we look at 20% less of vehicle theft, we're talking about cars being stolen.
Oh, cars being stolen.
Yes, whereas, and the Vice Mayor brought this up earlier, whereas thefts, break into a car and theft of items from a car actually fits into our larceny category. And you'll see that is rising, which is consistent with your impressions.
Okay. Well, I thought one kind of was the other, because you need the little FOB key now, and people are getting assaulted to take the FOB key and take the car with them, right?
And when that happens, we classify that as a robbery, because now they're taking it by force or fear from a person.
Good Lord. Okay.
I know.
Trying to
I
follow that
apologize.
one. Okay. All right. So then that's still robbery, and that's still decreasing. Okay. I see. So when it's a vehicle at a mall, the whole thing is taken, and the key is taken from the person, that's called robbery.
If we take the key fob from a person in order to steal the car, then that would be classified in the robbery category.
Okay. Thank you. All right. So I'm going to go into the sexual assault, and on page 6. This is something I was commenting to Jennifer. I know this is the UCR rape offenses, and this is the data that you all report on an ongoing basis, correct?
Correct, although there's a small caveat to that. This data is not necessarily a perfect match for what gets reported to UCR. This is based on what has been reported to us during those years, isn't necessarily the year that it occurred. And if the case is determined to be unfounded at a later date, say after it's reported to us, but before we report to UCR, it may not be reported out to UCR. So this is a very close match to the UCR data. But in order to pull all of that broken down in that section, we weren't able to capture it exactly as it goes out to UCR. But the difference is minuscule.
Okay. So I saw that there, and thank you for the breakdown here. I didn't see just a general sexual assault. So attempted sexual assault and attempted sexual assault domestic, and I'm thinking that's partners with partners, but not a sexual general assault that would include all of those numbers with children, that I would include children, or some of these could also be children. I just don't know if there's another category that's just standalone as sexual assault?
So the sort of the standard traditional, what most people consider to be a sexual assault, which is a man raping a woman, that is the second line there called rape. And that's 261 of the California Penal Code.
So how about sexual molestation? Where would that fall under?
So the sexual molestation, which is a sex act on a minor under 14 years of age, doesn't fit into the UCR reporting. Although, if the nature of that molestation is a rape, or if the nature of that molestation is a sodomy or penetration with a foreign object, then that's when that rings in on these sets of numbers. But sometimes some of the molestations are a lesser sexual offense than this list of 8. And in that case, it wouldn't pop up on this list.
Yeah, I saw the numbers a little less than what I've seen in the past, and so that was my concern. And I'm wondering, how can we capture those numbers? And the reason being is that when we saw these numbers in the past in our joint meetings with the county, on both occasions when we've had these meetings, we had this very general sexual assault, and then it was broken down, including some of these, but there was also just, the sexual molestation, and so then it allowed us to appreciate the level of abuse happening to children younger than 14. I don't know that we're going to capture this on an ongoing basis.
Well, the police department certainly does capture it, but am I bringing it to you?
Right.
Maybe that's the bigger question,
here,
right?
here in
Yeah,
PISFIS. Yeah, I'm
So-
sure that you're keeping track of it on your end.
So-
We're not seeing it, and I want to make sure that I keep my eye on those numbers as well.
And, and that's kind of why we really wanted to try to standardize how we do this.
Yes.
And this was my offer earlier in the year, was to do the breakdown of what amounts to the numbers you saw on page 4. And I was hoping that by doing that, we could at least get some consistency in what's being presented to you. Although, to be honest with you, if we want to start trying to parse out all the different things that are out there, there's a lot more than these 8 crimes that qualify.
No, that's my concern, is
Yeah.
that I know this is technically what we would call rape, and then this is the definitions of,
For the purposes of UCR, yes, ma'am.
right, for the purposes of UCR. Yes. And, just by description of these, I would say they are rape. So my concern is that it's not comprehensive enough for me to be able to appreciate what's happening with our community. And I don't want to lose that. Because when we had all the information, not just these categories, but the general categories, then we were able to see that there was a lot more numbers for children under the age of 14. And that, our data is going to drive us in terms of what we're going to do, the strategies that we're going to choose. And I want to make sure that we have the whole picture. So how can we include that information?
The whole picture is I think we experienced when we sat here for multiple hours several times over the summer, is always a big picture, right? And so ultimately the question here is, I think, do we want to get into that much detail as part of the bimonthly, or do we want to make some other venue for sharing that data? Because it takes hours to get into that level of detail. I'm not
I
sure.
can appreciate that.
I'm not sure if that's what you want from us in the bimonthly. Because
I'm certainly open to discussing it. It doesn't have to be bi-monthly. It could be on a quarterly basis or twice a year. I just want to make sure that we understand what those trends are. And certainly we can take this on a bi-monthly basis, but I'd like to see that information consolidated at some point and presented. I understand that there is a lot of information or a lot of filtering that you have to do, or a lot of work that leads up to these reports, and thank you so much for doing that. I just want us to be able to get into the pattern of seeing these numbers just really comprehensively, because if we just see these numbers, they're not telling us who this is happening to, and then we can't really strategize in terms of how do we maybe have different types of trainings because of the crimes that are happening. So for example, one of my suggestions for, or one of my questions for, on page 8, about the ongoing trainings, the trauma-informed approach training for detectives that's implemented. Based on this information, I'm gonna think that maybe these are this is all adult-driven, trauma-informed strategies, and we would really be missing the point in terms of addressing all of those children, or the needs of all of those children that are coming into our system, and how do we engage and interact with those victims, and how do we help our detectives support their interaction with those victims. So I think it's important for us to recognize who this is happening to, so that we can also tailor the type of training that we're going to ask for our detectives and for our police officers in general. Otherwise, we're just doing the same thing over and over again. I can appreciate that this is absolutely different, and this is very strategic, and I really appreciate this report and letting us know what's been implemented, what's in progress, what's pending. There's been a lot of work behind the scenes, and I'm absolutely grateful to our city manager, assistant city manager, Jennifer, who's just done a wonderful job. I just want to make sure that all that work pays off in the end and is leading us to some real systemic changes here. So if you could please provide that on an ongoing basis. I'm open to hearing what that ongoing basis is. If it's twice a year, I'm open to hearing that. If it's not too much, we could do it on a quarterly basis, but we can discuss offline what that would look like. I just want to make sure that that information leads up to something. And that something for me is, how do we support our police officers to address the crimes that are happening to our community? And if the crimes that are happening to our community aren't being reported, or at least we're not hearing of it here in PISFIS, then how can we help continue to support all of you with that? Because not all the dots are there. All right, so the next piece for me is this is a trauma-informed training for detectives, which has already been implemented. Did that include any, because we knew that the data at this point, or previous to today, we understood that the data was primarily more children of color and children who were under the age of 14. Did any of the trauma-informed approach consider that?
So a big component of that is the cultural elements of it. And so, yes, I mean, that's actually a huge function of that particular body of training, is talking about the differences between us, whether it's ethnic or cultural, and trying to find a way to appreciate that and incorporate that and make that and account for that in the way we interact with the survivors.
Yeah, no,
Yeah, so the short answer, yes.
Yes, that's really important culturally, ethnic, to have something sensitive to all the ethnicities that are being impacted by these crimes is absolutely important. What is missing for me is the developmental. So when we talk about crimes happening to children under the age of 14, there's some developmental signs that can tell the detectives, that can tell the officers something about what's happening with that child. A child who is younger than 12 or 10 may, when they're stressed, may look like they have attention deficit disorder, right? And they can't focus, and they're jumping off the rails here. And you might think that that's just an overexcited kid, but the reality is that's what stress looks like for some children. And I think those are the things that are important for me to have our officers know, and especially our detectives understand, that these are the signs of stress, and so that they can incorporate that into their assessment or in the ways that they interact with those victims. So if we could, when we continue to have trauma-informed approach training for detectives, that we have developmental, age-appropriate and developmental stages incorporated into that, especially as they impact the majority of the children that we are seeing being impacted by these crimes. So if it's happening more to our children under the age of 3, I think that's important to understand. Children under the age of 3 are completely different than the children who are 8 or 10, right? And I know that I heard from Dr. Sturm, who works at our child abuse center, where she sees most of the children for sexual assault exams, and she said she was seeing a lot more 3-year-olds, and we weren't seeing that in our numbers, and so there was a discrepancy between who she's seeing and the exams that are being conducted and the numbers that we were seeing in our system. And I know that not everybody reports, but there was some, it wasn't gelling correctly. So I just hope that we understand what those signs look like, so that way we can continue with to support those families that are coming into our system appropriately. So
Thank you.
that's that one. Yes.
I was just to say, I'll be happy to share that with the people who are developing the next level of training on that.
Wonderful, thank you. And then I'm going to move on to, I really appreciated, Vice Mayor, your question about the intersectionality, because sometimes some of these crimes, or the folks who are involved in any of these crimes, are one and the same, right? A sex worker could have been a victim of sexual assault, and a victim of sexual assault could be a victim also of domestic violence, and they're the same face, right? The same person, except we meet them in different scenarios, and then we treat them accordingly, the scenario that we interact with them. But the reality is that they're one and the same. And so I think for me, it's really important in terms of where do we want to interact with these victims or sex workers. If we interact with them on the street, then we are going to function the same way that we see other sex workers, right? We don't see them any different. We don't see them as former victims or survivors of sexual assault or domestic violence. We see them as sex workers. And so I appreciate that this intersectionality tool is being used, and that you're able to report more properly and assign the possibly some support services to the folks who are coming into our system. I think that's going to make a huge difference, and I'd love to see more about how that plays out in the future. But I think it's going to be a really important tool for us to figure out that sometimes these sex workers who are out in the streets are the same folks who are being victimized in their homes later on. So I just wanted to really just say great work on bringing that piece in, really great work on formalizing that SART committee. I look forward to seeing what you have for your work plan. I think you said you're going to have a meeting on March 12th. And the last piece for me is the Dear John letter. I forget what page that's on. I think it's page 14. Yeah, I know. It is called the Dear John letter. Well, at least that's what the chief called it. And so I know that he launched this off. We were nudging the chief because we saw a lot of the data, and the data said, there was a lot of the sex workers who were arrested, not nearly enough Johns, and so I think we need to make sure that we impact both ends of this industry, and I want to make sure that we are circulating this tool that we now have, which is this Dear John letter. How are we getting folks to report this? Because I think you said there was three tips per week or something?
Yes.
So how do people even know about the Dear John letter? And
We did a media presentation when we rolled that program out.
I remember.
And then it's easily accessed from sjpd.org and under the human trafficking tab.
Is that also part of our San Jose app, or is that not?
I do not know the answer to that.
No, no. Yeah, my San Jose app.
My San Jose app, I don't believe so.
I just think it should be really accessible to folks, so that way they can also be our eyes and ears. They're the ones living in those neighborhoods, and so that they could really help us out in decreasing some of that sex work that's out there, and hopefully lessening our enforcement, and having more of that partnership with our community. So I'd like to see how we can let our community know. At the very least, I think our neighborhood associations should have this information, and I don't know if there is a tip sheet or a how to report a John. I don't know how you would advertise that, but
And I don't know everything that work group is doing, but I'll look into it.
yeah, because when we say Dear John letter, we think somebody's breaking up with us and not telling us face to face.
We actually call it Report John.
Yeah. Okay, so I think that's great. I think it's wonderful that you're having 3 tips per week. I'm wondering, what is the result of those tips? Is that leading up to any arrest for some of those Johns?
No, and by design, that's not a plan where we go out and arrest people, but it's a plan, the design of that program.
To scare people off, yeah.
Is that we reach out to them by letter. We're sending letters to their home, telling them that they've been seen in a prostitution zone.
Yeah.
And so it's meant to suppress that activity. It's not meant to be enforcement oriented.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. I guess, have you seen any repeats then?
I don't have the answer to that, I'm sorry.
Okay, that would be interesting to find out, to see if this is something that really is useful, and then if we could help spread the word, and then have other neighbors who don't know about this, because I do remember that media release, although, not a lot of our residents are onto us on every media release that we do, but this is something that I think that for this community is very troubling. The prostitution is happening within their community, so I think they would love to probably be part of the solution, and why not allow for them to do that, since they're our eyes and ears, and they're living, and this is their neighborhood. I really like the John decoys. That's twice a month, you said?
Yes.
How is that working out?
It's been very productive. I don't want to discuss too much about how we do it, because
No,
it's
don't tell me
important
how you
not
do
to
it,
do
because
that
then
in
we're going to
public.
let
but,
everybody else know.
But it's been lucrative.
And that's leading up to arrest?
That always results in multiple arrests.
Great. I'm really glad to hear that there's more efforts on attacking this issue at both ends for the consumer, if you will. Although the pimping arrest that we saw here, I guess that's a little different than just any regular John. The pimping arrest is actually the person who is managing some of the sex workers.
That's absolutely right. They're 2 entirely different offenses.
And I saw that was lessened. Is that do you know for any particular reason why that's a lot less than over the last 2 years?
Yeah, we're sort of at the, I think there's two factors influencing that. One is you're at the mercy of the woman in the transaction, and whether she's willing to come forward and compromise her pimp. And the nature of the pimp-prostitute relationship is a very controlling nature, not unlike domestic violence relationships, and it's hard to encourage that and to get that degree of cooperation.
Well,
secondarily,
research tells us that a lot of sex or a lot of intimate partner relationships, sex workers sometimes get prompted by intimate partners, right? That's how it normally begins. It's not like somebody scouts you from school. It's somebody who who you're in a relationship with, and then facilitates this other possibility for you, or obliges you to do this other piece to it. My question behind this question was, is it that our sex workers are working for themselves rather than with a pimp? Is that something that you're noticing, or is it just that the intimidation tactics are more effective and the women or the men are not speaking up and against those pimps?
I think what you're seeing in 2019, that drop in 2019, is that we are seeing fewer prostitutes on the street. And as we see fewer prostitutes on the street, our opportunities, the number of opportunities we have to intervene are also reduced. There's always been an element in the sex trade of women working for themselves and women working with pimps. And that's always been there, that's still there. But because of that reticence that they have to report pimps, it's been extremely hard for us to quantify that, which is how much is which.
Got it. Okay. All right. Well, I appreciate all the information and thank you so much for the report. I commend you for all of the different strategies that you're taking to make sure that our communities are safer, that our women and men are safer out there in the streets. And so thank you for all that hard work, and thank you for this report once again.
Thank you. If you can go to the last slide. Sorry.
I'm almost there. I can do this. Okay, there we go.
That you did it. That was the last slide. So here you talk about, SJPD will press to retain our advantage. And then if you can go back to slide 18, I'm just curious if that's what you mean, is keeping this level of enforcement activity up. Okay, great. Because it has been well received by our community. Unfortunately, as you denoted in the map there, the high level of incidents that are happening in our city are all occurring in this corridor, which happens to be a low-income community within my district that has suffered the residual effects of waking up in the morning to take their kids to school, to seeing used condoms out in front, needles, to being solicited themselves from young ladies to mothers. This has been an ongoing occurrence for decades, as we know. And so it is, or has been well received, the uptick in enforcement. And then certainly, I think, the decrease, but at the same time, we know a lot of the prostitution just sort of moves around. So although a couple neighborhoods may, feel the positive effects, a couple others may be seeing the negative effects. And so I think keeping on top of it is really going to be important. And I do know that it takes a lot of proactive enforcement to do that. And I really do appreciate the efforts that our enforcement teams have put in, especially individuals like the decoy operations that go on, people that are putting themselves right there directly in harm's way. I do like Councilmember Rena's suggestion. I know that we are going through our transition of 311 and the My San Jose app, merger of the two, actually, and I think there's a great suggestion that, if the report, John, could also be something that we line up to be incorporated in San Jose 311 rather than currently as it is just through the online resource. So that's a direction towards our city manager's office, and I just had my update from our director of IT and their team. So if we can pass that along, I think that's a good suggestion that Councilmember Nevis made.
And absolutely, and Dolan Beckel is in the audience, and he says that we are developing our next list of services for the My San Jose app, which is going to be renamed to the San Jose 311, and we will consider that and prioritize that for the next round.
Great. And then I know that Councilmember Dennis was talking about in regards to the more robust data, and we have seen that in the past. We've had, whether it's special one-off meetings, the ones that we've had last year with the county, but we also have seen in the past more data just here at this committee. I would not necessarily advocate that that's something we do on our bi-monthly reports, especially if we're talking about comparing annual data. It doesn't quite benefit us, and it's, I don't think, worth the amount of time you would put into it to just get 2 months worth more of data when we're really comparing year over year. But I do think that, to see more robust list of data on a regular time frame would be benefit to this committee. I was thinking maybe there's an annual report that already came in that regard that was a little more robust. I could be wrong, but I know we do that with a lot of other items. And I'd be comfortable if somebody wanted to make the motion in that regard to at least have, this sort of bi-monthly stays the same of this higher level, but then once a year, like we do with other topics, we're sort of diving much more deep to look at the year-over-year data, to look at some of these, a division of more of the trends. And so that I'd be comfortable with, and that'd just be my recommendation for within a motion. If you wanted to respond, I don't know if you knew of any that we were already doing some of this on an annual basis, and I'm just not recalling right now.
I don't think that's, in my recollection, I don't think that's a subject we're covering with this committee or really any other committee on an annual frequency.
So I'm comfortable if somebody wanted to put that in the motion, and hopefully you'll be okay with that. So it would be to accept the report, the bi-monthly status report, but then to include the more robust annual reporting of the sexual assaults, correct?
Yes, and I think when we've seen this in the past, Chair, we've seen this report, I think maybe on a quarterly basis or something, because I remember we've had a breakdown of age. We've had quite a bit of a breakdown, and it wasn't on an annual basis. It was like every so often, and I think it was upon request. So I would like to see the more robust data, and not on an annual basis, but maybe on a semi-annual. I'm open to it. So like I said, I'm really open to this in terms of you telling me what the workload is and what's realistic to expect. But the purpose behind it is to really capture what's going on with the community and to figure out how do we support them. So I can leave that a little open so that we can determine with staff what that can be on an ongoing basis.
So what it was previously, actually was just a couple years ago, actually in these bi-monthly reports, there was a lot more data, but because of the reasons that I just stated, one, it was a lot of work for staff, and two, it wasn't as valuable getting sort of this robust annual data every 2 months. So we're really only getting 2 months worth of an update. And yet, the topics, in fact, this committee was sort of, we would at times pass that report without much discussion except for particular items. So what we decided a couple years back was, rather than have all of that data every other month, to have what you just said, which would be where we would pick a particular item, and we could have that brought up like we just did today, which was what I had asked for, was the update on prostitution. And so where, that was a one-off, we could ask for it on a one-off. We could do that now, and we have done that now in regards to what was just presented on some of the high-level rape cases, and we've done that last year. What I was saying was, rather than have to have, maybe ask that question every few months and say, hey, can you bring back the issue of sexual assaults as a special, that we should actually separate that out, but that on an annual basis I think would be more valuable for the discussion versus going back to what I think we had before, that quite honestly it was more information than we actually even were able to evaluate, and so it just wasn't worth the time of the officers putting it in for what we were actually debating. So we're in that system now where we have this, some high-level data coming to us every 2 months. We have the opportunity every 2 months to ask for something specific, but what we've actually seen is an interest, I think, over the last couple of years on some specific things that we don't want to have to keep asking for special reports on. Let's just add maybe an annual report on some of these special instances. I think sexual assaults would warrant that. So then that way we don't have to keep asking for a special one-off. You could do that. We do that every 2 months, and we could do that actually today to make a recommendation for, I think we had a recommendation, last year, if it was from yourself, or I think maybe Councilmember Dennis, on hate crimes, right? And we sort of, but it's not necessarily an annual report on hate crimes. It's just, we felt there was an issue, a trend, as the chief's office is looking at. So that's what, I think might be the best solution moving forward. We still have the opportunity every 2 months to just suggest something as a one-off that we want to hear.
Oh, I
So-
see. So one-off, anytime we so desire, but
Yes.
on a very consistent basis, an annual.
An annual deeper dive on sexual assaults.
On
Yeah.
some of this. Okay, I agree with you. I think that's very fair.
Is that understood?
Yes.
Okay.
And I think what we'll do is, just like we did with the sexual assaults, right now we have direction to every month, every bi-monthly report to at least report at this
Yes,
level
high
of
level.
data on the sexual assaults. When we do have special topics, I'm trying to note them in the work plan so we don't lose track of them. And then we will, then on the next development of the next work plan, we'll specifically put an annual sexual assault so we're not losing track of that. So we know when to expect it and it's transparent.
Great. And so then, can we then denote that it should include the age? And I think if we can revert back to some of those categories that we've seen in the past.
We'll make sure it's a detailed,
Jennifer?
we'll use the word the detailed annual report. So it's distinguished from this update.
Wonderful. And I don't know what you think, Chair, but I wonder if maybe we could do this biannually so we can see what the data is presented at maybe June before we go off to recess, and then maybe at the end of the year, just so that we don't lose track. And in case we need to create some shift, I would hate for us to lose track of what this is until the very end, and then we can then decide what, at the very end, what we're going to do for the following year. And we've already missed a budget opportunity there. So I would love to see it maybe on a biannual basis, and then one-offs whenever people, request it.
So I'm comfortable timing it so that it maybe is helpful for us in discussions with the budget, like, the January, February timeframe. I'll leave it to the will of the board. I personally would be comfortable at the 1 year timeframe, only because we do actually have a number of these other sort of high level that we want to dive deep into on an annual basis. And I don't know, honestly, if the data that they'll present outside of this data that is going to come to us every 2 months. So this will be here every 2 months.
Okay, so then I wouldn't consider this an annual, right? This is just
No,
a
this is not.
bi-monthly.
Yeah, we
So
haven't
when
had
will-
that deeper dive.
Yeah. When will we expect the annual report then? Because for us, it would benefit us before the budget discussions.
If I can make a suggestion, I think this time of year, or maybe even March, is a good time of year for the police department to capture year-end data of the entire preceding year.
Is it
And I
too
think-
quick to ask you?
I think March is a good time for
Okay.
that. February might be a little too soon, but then.
But I meant for next month. Is that
for
too
next
quick
month.
to ask you to?
Well,
That's what I'm
actually,
saying.
it
Is that
would be April. It would be April because this is a bi-monthly, so it
if we
won't
tie it
be.
up with the bi-monthly. it would be
Yeah,
April.
if it's a bi-month, if it's part of the bi-monthly and a deep dive, it would be the April report would be become the annual.
Yeah, I don't know if that's your intention to have it always be tied to the bi-monthly or not.
That's not my
but-
intention. No,
You
it does
want
not.
a separate
I
report.
don't think it has to be tied to the bi-monthly. If it's an annual report, I think it
can
could live on
stand
its
alone.
own.
Yeah.
I guess my question to you is, could you pull something together specifically around sexual assaults? And you could look back historically at what Councilmember Dennis is talking about, really just, honestly, I think the last time we had this was maybe a year and a half, 2 years ago, when, it was broken down, all sorts of the crimes of sexual assault, as you know what I'm talking about, right? So if you want to look at that and say, just parse out the sexual assaults portion, if you think you could bring something like that back to us, I wouldn't mind adding that to our agenda for next month, and that would start our 1 year annual cycle. So,
I like that.
but honestly, I'm deferring to your ability to be able to do that. So.
It's a bit of a challenge. I mean, those reports are due in 2 weeks for the March PISFIS, and we, honestly, that work group right now is in the middle of bifurcating as one of those work items we talked about. So they're really busy right now. They're also preparing a report for you on sexual assault training that's going to come to you in the March PISFIS. So I don't, that would be a heavy lift to do that this March.
What about April?
I presume we could. I don't want to speak explicitly for the people who are going to have to do the work, but certainly we'll do what the committee asks us to do.
Well, I don't want to demand something that somehow all of a sudden, right, you're not able to produce. And I think that if we were able to get the data, April is actually still before we're going to make our final decisions on the budget. We could try to then line it up next year for March timeframe, right? So then that way but at least for this year, we can kind of start in that regard. But again, I'm deferring to you. I'm not trying to force your hand to say, yes, April is perfect. Yeah. vice mayor says your body language is saying
Do not
no.
read his body language.
I don't, my body, I don't know. I don't want to say no directly, but I'm making a commitment for another work group, and that's a little hesitant to make that commitment for another work group. But
So what-
April would be light years better than March.
Then March. Great, yes.
And the PISFIS agenda is doable in April, better than March right now, what we've got
Okay.
lined up.
So, look, and if anything is to change, right, I think if we can just ask the city manager's office to give us a heads up. So if you don't mind, maybe can compile that into a motion with just accepting of the report, asking for now an annual reporting of the sexual assaults, more deeper dive, and then we can try to start that in April this year.
And, well, maybe make one more suggestion. Maybe trying to ease the workload burden. Maybe in the April bimonthly report, we actually do it as part of the bimonthly, so it's not a huge written report for them, and we get a lot more statistics in that report than go to the written separated report for the following year. And so kind of just ease into it. Would that be acceptable to the committee?
I am fine with that all.
Sure, I'm fine with that. So the motion is to accept the report and then ask for an annual report in April, however you want to, it doesn't have to be written, but I think you said just statistics. And then from there on, from 2021, beginning 2021, we would have it in the February month on an ongoing basis with the deeper dive and the breakdown.
March would be easier just for the data collection.
You mean
March.
Going forward into
Sure.
2021.
March
Yes.
2021, sure.
Do we have a second? We have a second. Okay. No other discussion. I don't see any cards on this. No speakers in the public. And if you are wishing to speak on any item, please just fill out one of the yellow cards that are down here and drop it in the box. So seeing none, then all those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? None. Motion passes. Thank you very much. And we'll move on to item D2, our second quarter financial reports for fiscal year 2019-2020.
Good afternoon, Chair, members of the committee. We have today for you the presentation on the second quarterly report. We have an opportunity today, hopefully, to present the entire report. We will be brief. I have with me today Joe Gray, who's our debt administrator, Chin-Yu Sun, our principal investment officer, and Rick Bruno is the deputy director over revenue management. And then we can take questions at the end, and then the investment policy is then the next item after this item. So with that, I'll turn it over to Chin-Yu. No, to Joe. Joe's the first one.
Good afternoon. The city's outstanding debt portfolio as of the end of December, shown in the graph there, is $4.7 billion. And that's represented by the vertical bars, and the gold is the city-issued debt, and then the blue is the conduit debt, and each dot on those bars represents the actual debt issued during that reporting period. And that amount through December 31st was $584 million. This pie chart shows by credit category or issuance type, the amount of debt that's outstanding just for the city's portion, and it does not include the multifamily housing revenue bonds. So each of the pie sections there will provide you the amount that's outstanding, in both in terms of dollar amount and also a percentage of the total of the roughly $3.89 billion. The largest components would be the SARA tax allocation bonds at $1.476 billion. And then the airport revenue bonds and commercial paper at $1.213 billion. Select debt issuance and debt management activities that occurred during the second quarter, some of the most significant ones. For debt issuance, we issued debt for 3 projects there for multifamily housing revenue, Vista Park, Palm Court, and Quetzal Gardens. We also issued $3 million in commercial paper notes for the airport. One of the debt management activities that we did, one of the key ones, was issue an RFP for investment banking underwriter services for the CSJFA lease revenue bonds, and that's for the ICE Center expansion and the CSJFA refunding. Reports that were completed during that period, the 2019 Comprehensive Annual Debt Report, which you have received copies of, or CATR, and then every December we conduct our annual disclosure and compliance reporting to the MSRB board. Debt activities that we expect to achieve and get done through this fiscal year for debt issuance, we've mentioned the ICE Center expansion. That'll be designated Series 2020A, and that'll be $145 million. Lease revenue refundings, that'll be designated Series 2020B. That's $350 million. That's going to occur late spring of 2020. The multifamily housing revenue bonds that are scheduled for this fiscal year, the Allen Rock Family Housing Project at $42 million, Page Street Studios at $40 million, West San Carlos Supportive Housing at $35 million, and Ballback at $45. Debt management activities that we're working on or have completed is for the airport expansion, their capital and debt planning activities. We redeemed a portion of the 2007 bonds that occurred in February 20, really just last weekend. We completed an annual debt transparency report to the state treasurer. That was done on January 31st, 2020. This graph just shows the fixed rate 10-year tax-exempt market. So you can see the graph is the bond buyer geo bond index from December of 2009 through December 2019. You'll see how it's fluctuating. The average during that 10-year period was 3.55%. And so currently, within the last 2 years, obviously it's well below that. Currently, as of the reporting date, was just roughly 2.1%. This graph shows variable taxable and variable tax exempt interest rates for the last calendar year from December 18 to December 2019. And you'll see the dark line is the 1-month LIBOR. That's the taxable proxy, the taxable rate that we use. And then for SIFMA, it shows it's a weekly reset tax exempt rate. And clearly those are well below 2.5% for the LIBOR and about 1.1% or so, 1.1% for the SIFMA.
I think I don't know if it's your mic is not working. Could be that you're too tall.
Or too much of this, so I can't really squeeze in, but I'll do my best. I'm sorry about that. The city's credit ratings remain high. For general obligation, it's AA+, and that's one notch below the highest rating you can achieve, which is AAA. The city's lease revenue bonds is one notch below its GEO rating, and it's essentially AA. The city's GEO bonds continue to be rated higher than the state of California's. They're essentially the same as the county's GEO bonds, except for the S&P rating is full AAA. The city's airport bonds are rated A, and the SARA senior tax allocation bonds are rated AA, and the subordinates are AA-, both rated by S&P and Fitch. Is investments next? All right.
Thank you, Joe. This is for the second quarter investment report. The city's investment policy conforms to the California Government Code sections 53-600. The policy authorizes us to invest only in high-grade fixed income securities. The policy is reviewed annually and shall be adopted by resolution of the City Council. The investment program is audited semi-annually for compliance purposes. The city manages investment to meet the following objectives: safety, liquidity, and yield in that order. The quarterly report is posted online and also placed in the Pacific Community agenda and separately agendized for the City Council's acceptance later. At the end of the second quarter, the size of the portfolio has a book value of $1.9 billion. The earned interest yield was 2.28%. The weighted average days to maturity was 641 days. Fiscal year to date net interest earning was over $23 million. There were no exception to the city's investment policy during this quarter. Of that $1.9 billion, 39% was invested in treasuries and agencies, 8% was invested in supranationals, and 47% was invested in credit sectors, which includes CDs, CPs, corporate notes, and municipal bonds. And another 4% was invested in pass-through notes that includes asset-backed securities and mortgage-backed securities. And the city's investment is made of multiple funds. And the red section is general fund. It was valued at $268 million at the quarter end, which accounted for about 14% of the total portfolio. The general fund balance increased by $56 million to $268 million at the quarter end, mostly due to the ad valorem tax advancements. There are a sufficient amount of investment maturities and revenues to cover the next 6 months' expenditures. This chart compares the cash balance changes of a few selected funds. The red line indicated in this chart is a general fund. You can see it moves up and down throughout the year, and it shows the obvious seasonality. This year, because the city chose not to pre-fund retirement contribution, we are expecting to see a little bit higher average balance for general fund, will contribute to some additional interest earning than previous years. The city compared the investment pool performance with LAIF and the Bank of America Merrill Lynch index. During the last 24 months, there were 15 months period the city's portfolio underperformed LAIF, and the city's portfolio was the blue line in the chart. That was mostly because during that time, the interest rate was fast increase, especially in the short-term interest rate, and LAIF was a lot much shorter investment portfolio, so they can pick up the interest rate increase a lot faster than we did, so that they outperformed us during that 15-month period. Starting from August 2019, the performance of the city portfolio improved above the LAIF. There is still a little bit gap between the Bank of America Merrill Lynch index and the city's portfolio, but we expected the gap to narrow in the next few months. On September 17, 2019, the council adopted resolution number 79-51 to declare a climate emergency, and the resolution directed the investment staff to look at portfolio exposure to fossil fuel companies. We identified 2 separate investments, actually for the same security, for a total amount of a little bit over 16 million. The security was bought in two pieces. One was on March 5th, 2019. The other piece was on May 13, 2019. Both were mature on the same day, May 16, 2021, and because they were bought at different time, the yields kind of are slightly different. One was had a higher yield at 2.71, the other was 2.50%. So this is the only exposure to fossil fuel company in the portfolio. Staff has made no new investment in fossil fuel companies since adoption of the resolution on September 17, 2019. Our strategy is We'll maintain the same as we talked about before. We'll continue matching the investment maturities with no expenditure within the next 24 months horizon. We'll extend a portion of the portfolio beyond the 2-year term when appropriate to provide income and structure to the portfolio. We'll maintain the diversification of the portfolio, and I will always focus on the core mandates of safety, liquidity, and yield. With that, I'll hand this back to Rick.
Thank you, Jinyu. And now I'll cover the quarterly report for the revenue management programs. Our objective is to reduce delinquent accounts and to enhance revenue compliance. So I'll start off, I'll cover the activities for this quarter. And then we also have an update on one of our programs that we are currently running, the Business Tax Amnesty Program, which will provide an update in terms of how that's performing and the revenue that we're generating through that strategy. So in terms of our program, we break it down into 4 different business units. We have an accounts receivable team, a business tax program, compliance and monitoring, and then our utility billing. This next slide is more for context in terms of the portfolio that the Revenue Management Division is responsible for overseeing. In the city's nearly $3.5 billion budget, Revenue Management has responsibility for billing or collecting or monitoring over $1 billion. The largest component of that is the utility billing. That we also do reviews quarterly on our sales tax, remittances, and the miscellaneous billing. That's our miscellaneous billing accounts receivable system, where various departments throughout the city will generate the invoices, and our team is responsible for collecting. There's a number of other business tax and other taxes there, lodging taxes, franchise fees, utility users taxes, where we engage with a third-party consultant to help us audit and review the taxes and fees that are remitted to the city, and to ensure that they're in compliance with our ordinances. This slide is a 5-year comparison of the invoicing and payments that have been generated in our 3 billing systems within revenue management. The first one is utility billing, business tax, and RevQ is our miscellaneous accounts receivable system. So those 3 systems combined bill between $400 and now it's over $500 million on an annual basis. As you can see there, the majority of the amount has been paid. There are still some accounts receivable that are outstanding, so there's the sliver at the top of each of these bars that show the amount that's still outstanding. And those amounts will be carried forward onto this graph, where you can see the total outstanding receivables for those 3 systems at the end of the quarter is approximately $50 million. The larger portion of that, the gray portion of that, is the delinquent debt that we categorize as being 91 days or older. And there's also current receivables that have been billed within 0 to 90 days in the blue shading. The red bar cutting through the graph and indexed to the right axis shows the delinquency percentage change from the prior quarter. As you can see, over the past 6 quarters, that percentage change has been relatively stable and actually on a decline. These 2 pie charts represent the prior slide, about $50 million in total accounts receivable outstanding within our systems, 18 of which is current and 32 of which is the delinquent debt. We show a breakdown of that by collection status, so we have staff in-house that work these accounts in trying to collect through letters, through making phone calls, through following various collection techniques, including liens, small claims courts, etc. So we have the largest portion of that delinquent portfolio is being managed in-house and is considered an active collection. We do use a third-party collection agency to help assist us in collecting delinquent accounts, and then we also will utilize the city attorney's office in terms of collecting some larger debts that require us to go to Superior Court. In terms of the last few items there, we have some write-off pending category, a few invoices that are set aside for liens, and also some that are in a payment plan status. So this slide represents the trend of our collections and our return on investment for our collection staff. So the bar charts are indexed to the left axis. So you can see on a quarterly basis in the second quarter of fiscal year 1920, we collected just over $3 million, and that was at a rate of 6.4 to 1. So that is for every dollar that our staff, it costs our staff for collections, they're returning 6.4 times that amount in accounts receivable. So you can see over time, we've been, except with the exception of the one quarter, we've been above our target of 5.5. We continue to identify new strategies, and on the next slide, I'll talk about one of those strategies. So our business tax amnesty program is one program where Council had approved back in August of 2019, and just as a recap, this program forgives the penalties and interest on accounts that had never registered, are underreporting their taxes, or are delinquent on their taxes. That we will waive the penalties and interest in exchange for paying the principal amount of tax owed. So this is a program we began in October of last year and will end March 27th of next month. In terms of our delivery of this program so far, it's been really successful. We've delivered a comprehensive outreach and marketing plan. The program is performing as expected in terms of the numbers of businesses applying for amnesty, as well as the revenue that's been generated. And through December 31st, 2019, more than 1,250 businesses have benefited from it. Revenue generation is over 700,000, and we've had a number of outreach activities. As I noted, it was comprehensive. We've been mailing directly leads that we have. You may have seen VTA bus advertisements, advertisements in the newspaper, heard advertisements on the radio stations, and of course, in terms of flyers, we've worked with the Small Business Advisory Task Force and the Vice Mayor and his team in helping disseminate some of that information. The team in the City Manager's Office of Communications has done a great job helping us promote and sending out social media posts and getting awareness of this program. So we thank them for that, and I believe I'm going to pass it back to Julia.
So thank you. So the recommendation is to accept the report and refer it to the March 10th, 2020 council meeting for full adoption. So with that, we're available to answer any questions.
Thank you. Any questions from my colleagues? Vice Mayor Jones.
Can you explain to me the successor agency tax allocation bonds, what exactly that means?
Well, the former redevelopment agency had about $1.5 billion, $1.6 billion in bonds outstanding. And at the end of 2017, they had, I think it was about 25 series of bonds outstanding, and we wrapped them all together and did one massive refunding where we consolidated it, and now we have 3 series of bonds outstanding. So those bonds will remain, we didn't extend the maturity at all. We weren't allowed to under dissolution law. So basically, those bonds will be outstanding until 2035, right, Joe? Yeah. And so that's what that is. And so the tax increment that would have previously gone to the redevelopment agency first goes to pay off debt, and then a delta between the two of those numbers basically is spread back out to the taxing entities. So the city is benefiting by increased property tax revenue from dissolution because we're getting some additional revenue.
So so paying down those bonds comes out of, you said, the tax increment?
Yeah, it comes out of the tax increment.
And so where would, since you have those bonds outstanding, why would you have additional funds to distribute to the
Because
to
the
the
way,
taxing
the
entities.
taxing entities, because the way kind of disillusionment works is that the redevelopment agency, now the successor agency, still exists. So all of the spread between what was the original property value when the agency was formed and then when it is today, that delta is what's called the money that goes into the redevelopment agency property tax trust fund. And then through the dissolution law, there's a certain waterfall in which obligations are paid. First, the county takes off the top some of their obligations, then we pay debt service. Then if there's money left over, it's spread out by the county to the taxing entities based on their pro rata share of the property tax revenue that they would receive in those districts. So, and that stays in effect until the last bond issue is paid off, and then redevelopment is officially gone, and the property tax will just be distributed as it would in any, throughout the city in the various taxing entities.
I understand your explanation. Thank you for that. I just still scratching my head why it wasn't designed to pay
Well,
down the debt.
Well, because there were original bondholders, and now there's bondholders today, and so we have to ensure that they are kind of first in line to receive that revenue. And you wouldn't want to dilute their, essentially their credit that they had before disillusionment went away. So it was structured that way so that we didn't inadvertently create a negative situation for the taxing, for the bondholders. And that's how the state law was kind of put together. So.
Great. Thank you. That was my question.
Thank you, and I'm sorry, we do have a public speaker, Ruth Marino. Yeah, come on down, Ruth.
Good afternoon. My name is Ruth Marino, and I represent San Jose Community Energy Advocates. We're a community group that advocates for reducing greenhouse gas emissions. Today I sent you a letter on this topic from San Jose Community Energy Advocates and the Sierra Club Loma Prieta regarding the fossil fuels. First, I'd like to thank you for declaring a climate emergency. I don't need to tell you about the disastrous effects of climate change, but I will remind you that tonight is the 3rd anniversary of our own Coyote Creek flooding. As Ken just mentioned right now, as part of the climate emergency, the resolution asks staff to review our fossil fuel investments. We have 2 which will mature next year in May and which represent less than 1% of the portfolio. It seems that the intent of the resolution was to cease new fossil fuel investments, and what we're asking now is that you formalize this ceasing new fossil fuel investments in the investment policy. I'd also like to let you know that in response to your referral, this morning, the San Jose Federated Retirement Board listened to 3 hours of educational presentations on environmental, social, and governance factors relating to investments. One of the presenters was from BlackRock, the world's biggest fund manager. She quoted the BlackRock CEO in which he said that regarding the evidence on climate risk is compelling investors to reassess core assumptions about modern finance. These questions are driving profound reassessment of risk and assessment values. And he said that in the near future and sooner than anticipated, there will be a significant reallocation of capital. Okay.
Thank you, Ruth. So I do have a question on page 24. Just curious in regards to the percentage drop there of collections. All we see is the past 5 years. So what I see is, in my mind, from the past 5 years, a pretty significant drop from 99 down to 96.5. I'm curious if we have further historical data, or if you can let me know, is that 96 a number we should be concerned about, this trend downward?
Yeah, I could answer that. You should not be concerned about it. It's just a matter of time before we were able to collect on those more recent invoices. The reason why we've been so successful for those periods 4 and 5 years out is because we've had more time to collect on those debt. So I think it's just a matter of timing before it would shift over.
So you're telling me that's not a snapshot in time, that's ongoing. So you're saying from fiscal year 14-15, since then, for the last 5 years, like that number back in 14-15 might have been 96 or 95%, and then now it's gone up to 99? Is that what you're telling me?
Just to clarify, this represents all of the invoices that were issued in that fiscal year, 14-15. And so we've had 5 years to collect on that debt, and we've only had 1 year to collect, or less than 1 year, to collect on the most recent fiscal year.
No, it makes sense. And in fact, I just had deja vu. I feel like I asked you this question last time, so probably did. but I understand it. I feel like I understand it, or I understood it last time, but be prepared for the same question again. Yeah, exactly. And then just in regards to Ruth's comment, and Ruth, I'm sorry, I haven't had a chance on my colleagues. I just checked, I got about 111 emails waiting for me since just this morning alone. So just curious, I don't know if staff had an opportunity to take a peek at it, and I especially if it just came in today, I don't imagine, but any response in regards to
that would be the extent of it. I had an opportunity to read it through once, and Chinyu sits on the Federated Retirement Board, so she was in that all this morning, so we haven't had a chance to chat. The next item on your agenda is the investment policy, the annual review of the investment policy, and those are mostly technical changes. We have a section 22 in the investment policy about social responsibility, and different issues have come up over time with respect to specifically restricting our investment in specific categories. And our general philosophy has been that we prefer the more broader language that's included in section 22 so that we don't get kind of narrowed down into particular areas. Many of these companies that are big fossil fuel companies like Chevron and Shell, are working to change their business model. For example, San Jose Clean Energy contracts with Shell for clean energy. So to create that narrow focus, which may then preclude us from doing investments in a subsidiary that may be doing clean energy, we just think maybe a little narrowing. So we can look at I encourage you to read section 22. If you think there should be a more broader or a more specific section of that, then we can take that back under advisement and come back at a later date.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, and without the luxury of kind of really diving into what I would be, advocating or not for, I think that will have to wait to a later date. But we will have the discussion on this next item that's right around the same conversation. But for now, let's see if we can get a motion on this. Motion and a second. All those in favor say aye. Aye. And that did include a referral to the March 10th council meeting. Yes, it did. So now we will move on to item D3, our investment policy.
Yes, I'm Julia Cooper, Director of Finance with Chinyu. We don't have a specific presentation. We just have the staff reports in your packet. The changes that we're recommending are relatively minor. Some rating requirement language changes to kind of standardize the terminology. We're deleting rating requirements for bankers' acceptance since those programs don't really hold a rating. Updating the primary dealer list, some other technical cleanup. So there was a red line copy of the policy attached. So we're recommending that you approve that and then pass it on to the council for full adoption on March 10th.
Great, thank you very much. And Ruth, I'll invite you back down again. So did you wanted to speak on both this? Yeah, you got 2 more minutes.
I saw my time run out.
That was for the last item, so I'm giving you an extra 2. This is a different item, but you can talk about the same thing. Feel free.
Yeah. First of all, I'm not an expert in investments, but I did want to mention that San Jose Clean Energy Fossil fuel, yes, they buy natural gas, well, a little bit of natural gas. I think that's different. I think those are contracts, not investments, and we're just talking strictly about investments similar to the Chevron, but I could be wrong, so they can correct me on that. And I also wanted to say that included in the letter I sent you this morning, other cities, including Mountain View and Oakland, have ceased to invest in fossil fuels. The UC system stopped investing in fossil fuels 5 years ago. I don't believe it was through a resolution. It might have been similar to what we're doing, just we're not investing anymore. And so they have an $80 billion portfolio, and coincidentally, the day of the resolution was the day that their investment manager wrote an op-ed in the LA Times, which basically said that they're making more money, they've ceased investments, and they did it formally. And so what we're hoping is that San Jose can do something similar, let these Chevron investments mature, don't make any more investments, and then we would be fully divested. And also, if we were to invest in clean energy investments, that those, of course, would meet the core investment requirements of safety, liquidity, and yield. And, we would obviously support that. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Ruth. Okay, any comments, questions from my colleagues? Seeing none, if we can get a motion, and that'll be also to refer this to the same date, March. Sorry, March, what was it again? 10th, March 10th. Okay, so we have a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye. Aye, motion passes. Thank you. We're on to our last item, item D4, our Smart City Roadmap, Safe City Strategies Status Report. Thank you very much.
So good afternoon, Mr. Chair, members of the committee, members of the public, and city staff. I'm Dolan Beckel, Director of the Office of Civic Innovation. Joining me in the front box is Assistant Fire Chief Reginald Williams from the Police Department and Deputy Director Ryan Doolin from the Fire Department. For this last report, the Safe City Strategy Report, clicker, we're going to review the Safe City Strategy goals, provide an overview of the projects that are complete, and the new projects. We'll provide the much anticipated demonstration of the business intelligence tool that Vice Mayor Jones and other people have been waiting for quite a while. And last, we'll talk about next steps with the Safe City Strategy. So moving on, the goals of the Safe City Strategy are twofold. One is to broaden the use of data and data analytics for making informed decisions. And the second is to utilize digital platforms to improve public safety and emergency response. The completed projects, there are 4 of them that we have in some way, shape, or form showed you, demonstrated, or had screenshots in prior committee meetings. The first is the Omega Crime View dashboard from the Police Department that provides an automated access to incident data for use in the field and at community meetings, and that is complete and operational. The crimemapping.com, which the public can public can view crime activity in their neighborhood via a web-based dashboard from the Police Department, that is complete. The Crime View Advanced Reporting, which provides multi-parameter and task-specific statistical reporting of incident data from the Police Department. And the last but not least, the Central Emergency Vehicle Preemption, which saves an average of 24 seconds per emergency response and is now deployed at all 956 city-managed intersections by the Fire Department. Those are all complete and deployed. Projects that are still under development, predictive missions from the Police Department. The goal here is to provide patrol staff with an accessible resource to proactively identify areas of high risk for proactive patrol. This is in the process of issuing a RFP. The original solution had critical issues, and therefore the Police Department is taking this back for a new request for proposals, and that is in the procurement prioritization board as we speak, and it has been prioritized. The second is the fire station alerting system that provides automated key dispatch steps, resulting in reduced call processing and reducing overall response time. The status is the network architecture modifications are underway, and the estimated completion is this spring. Finally, under development, the mass notification system from the Office of Emergency Management. This increases the city's capability to alert and notify San Jose residents during emergency events. And they're currently implementing recommendations that came in from San Jose State University's mass warning study. So the new projects is Text to 911, a digital platform. By texting 911, potential victims can contact the department's emergency services when a voice call is not possible or not desired. So this has been in use for the past year. There have been 894 texts to 911, and 5 of those texts, it was determined that the texter would have been in more serious danger if they had used a traditional 911 phone call, showing the value of the text 911. Last but not least is the business intelligence tool by the fire department. This provides near real-time information to fire department leadership on key business metrics to help the department understand and improve its performance, and there's a demonstration to follow. So I think what I'd like to point out is this is not a video. These are not screenshots. This is an actual live demonstration of the actual system that the fire departments use. And as such, it's always subject to some technical gremlins in the machine. So we have our fingers crossed that you're actually going to see a real demo of the business intelligence system. And now I'm going to turn it over to Deputy Director Ryan Doolin.
So thanks, Dolan. Good afternoon, Chair and members of the committee. Before I get into the actual demo and walking the committee through the dashboards, I wanted to quickly explain what the business intelligence means to the fire department, why implementing these tools provide a lot of value in managing an agency with such an important mission as ours, and what's next for us. When most people speak of BI, which is business intelligence, they immediately visualize charts, graphs, and cool-looking displays. But that's only half of it. BI is really about methodologies, processes, and strategies that take raw data and transfer it into useful information for decision making. When the department started its intense focus on response time improvements back in 2014, we realized at that time that BI would provide a much needed avenue to mine large amounts of data, improve our data analysis capabilities, keep a near real-time pulse on key performance metrics, and make this information readily accessible to department leadership. Before BI, our response time data reports were put together on manually on a monthly basis, providing only a retrospective view of the performance, giving us no way to be more dynamic to meet our demands of our response system. Any reporting would be done on a request for fill basis, causing delays, sometimes days, to get basic incident volume data on the fly. Key performance measures that we identified as being essential to our business involved multiple personnel and were collected annually during the budget process, way after the fact and way into the new fiscal year. And we had virtually no insight into the large amounts of existing data, and making things even more complicated, in many cases, the data had to be collected from disparate systems that don't communicate with each other to get a real picture and provide responses to strategic, tactical, and operational inquiries. Given all these challenges, this committee adopted the response time work plan in 2014, specifically authorizing the department to include BI as one strategy to get in compliance with county and city response time requirements. This department has consistently been tackling the list of projects included in the work plan, some of which Dolan went over previously. This timeline on the slide shows the path BI has taken over the years, with the majority of time spent in the RFP procurement process, consolidating data elements into a robust data warehouse platform, and data validation so that we have the high level of confidence to rely on these dashboards when making decisions. Because of this type of data, these systems contain the vendor actually had to go through backgrounding. So as in the procurement process under RFP in 2015 to 2017, that was the significant delay in actually making this in production. With such a high level of confidence in the data, methodologies, and processes that make up BI, we believe every corner and level of the organization can benefit from this information, from senior management all the way down to field operations live in the field. The fire department sees unlimited potential with BI, and you will see from the demo a glimpse into how we can use the tool to monitor and improve our business strategies, advance decision-making and productivity as the information will be at our fingertips, centralized ability to correlate information from disparate systems, and a solid platform where once methodologies are created, data validation is minimized. So we did have a video that we were looking at timing, but I'm just going to go directly into the live demo. So let me go ahead and switch to, this is live on the system. So all of these numbers are true up until last night at 11:59. So these are the dashboards. And let me see if I can click through here. You can see 3 tabs at the bottom here. One is for the county EMS contract response time. The second tab is the city response time compliance. And the third is another element outside of our field operations, but it's mostly our budget performance measures. And I'll go through each one of them so we can go into a little bit more detail. For the county dashboard, the display includes our Code 3 and Code 2 incidents by month within this current fiscal year. So you'll see that July 1st all the way to today. And this is our current Code 3 response, which for February would be 91%. With this interface, you are able to hover over the month and display the specific performance for that month. So let's just take, if we took September, which is 92.94%, it'll actually give us the correlated Code 2 information. The total incidents are displayed in the upper right-hand corner. So right here for this month, we have 5,960 incidents. This is the type of information that it would normally take 3 staff members to involve in compiling manually at the end of every month and emailing out a robust Excel spreadsheet. Now the same high-level data is refreshed nightly and available to our senior staff through this dashboard. So what we've actually done is made this available so that we can make dynamic changes from operations point anytime during the month. We don't have to wait till the end of the month, say, oh, well, we're actually teetering just on 89%. And we actually have backup data where we're able to get down to the company and level. So we make that available through those Excel spreadsheets out to the field. And I'll talk a little bit about what the result has been from that practice. Similarly, the city response time compliance works the same way. However, compliance is calculated differently. So for the city compliance, we use all the calls, not just the EMS like we do for the county. So the methodology is different, but no one has to go back in and redo all the calculations for that month. It just projects it and is embedded in, the business rules are embedded in and created within the data warehouse. So when our business rules change, we only need to modify them when our business rules change, resulting in the less likelihood of human error, a decrease in the time it takes to scour through tens of thousands of records. As you can see, just for currently this year, we're at 56,000 incidents, and that's not including canceled calls that the companies respond to. And as of the end of January, I'm happy to report that the department has hit 22 consecutive months of meeting the county compliance requirements, which you know is a significant improvement from the prior years. We'll also be expecting to realize even more improvements as some of our other Safe City projects come online and go into production, such as the Fire Station Alerting Project and our dual network connectivity, which Dolan mentioned before. And then lastly, which, you know, being over the administrative side of the house, I'm kind of excited about, we wanted to include the department budget performance measure dashboard, since there are a lot of staff time spent tracking and calculating this data at the end of the year. So we really had no visibility into this. We have liaisons in each one of our bureaus. We have 5 bureaus. And then we have in our administrative area or unit someone to coordinate that. So we would have to reach out to each staff member, pull the data, validate the data to see if there was any anomalies. And if there were, we would have to go back to the bureau and ask questions back and forth and could not see a trend over time. So we felt like every year we were kind of revisiting the same topics and trying to figure out what really is going on with our business. Now we have immediate access to the total incident count by type. Again, this is all near real time. This is as of last night. In the past, this information could take a day or more to compile and involve multiple staff members. We would have to validate the data and also look for accuracy. So some of the numbers would be just transposed by 1 digit, and it would throw off our numbers, and then someone would have to go back and look through all of that data. As with the other dashboards, you can see how I'm able to drill down by the incident type and then see the breakdown of priority 1 and 2 incidents. So if I take a number of fires and just click on that, it'll actually tell me the number of fires that are associated with priority 1 and priority 2 in the upper right-hand corner, so here. So as of the total number of fires, we have just 1,490 incidents that were priority 1. So that's lights and sirens that we are responding to. That kind of concludes that demo part. So our next steps are to incorporate the detailed budget performance measures, expense reports, and department inventory data into the platform, given these current processes are primarily manual today. We want to expand the dashboards to the Bureau of Fire Prevention and to our field operations area, which again, a lot of the work is manual, and we just want to have visibility into the business processes that we currently collect data on, but don't have the type of visibility or transparency. We want to continue investment in the BI tools to help us manage our business and service delivery to the public, which includes a sensible licensing model and access that will need to work out. Each one of these, whether you're displaying it internally to a set of employees, you have to have a certain licensing kind of model, which can be quite expensive. And then we want to expand our data analytic capabilities, raising the bar and focus on what the data tells us, using the data to improve our services, and a more objective decision-making process. And then now this concludes the demo portion of the presentation. I'd like to thank Maha Devarajan, Edgar Martinez, Joseph, and our vendor Agria for all the work that's been put into this project over the last 2 years. And I'll hand it over to Dolan to wrap up this item.
Great. Thanks, Ryan. You might want to click your speaker off there. So before we go on to actually next steps, I mean, I think Ryan's being a lot. This is a big deal. This is a 5-year journey of acquiring technology, building a data warehouse, making sure the data in the data warehouse was accurate before using it to make business decisions, and finally having a dashboards and tools to make business decisions. So this was really a classic structured approach. I'm sure we'd also like to think it could go faster, but this is the way it needs to be done, and this is a big deal. So congratulations to the team on getting this first step, and I think you'll now see that foundational effort in place will allow, and Ryan's going, if I get the resource, will allow the additions to this data warehouse and this business intelligence tool to continue to accelerate. So that concludes the core of our presentation. In terms of next steps for the Safe City strategy, as to Councilmember Perala's statement about deja vu, this is the second time I've had to say this. We are going to be securing a resource to develop a Safe City strategy. We've had this project seems to be suffering from resourcing challenges. Both times we've had the resource for family reasons have to leave the city early. So we are looking to resource this again, starting in July. At that point, we'll refine the scope of the Safe City strategy. This has primarily been about data and platforms, and it may make sense to revisit that scope with the departments to refine what's going to make most sense to move forward. And then we'll report back to PISFIS in the spring of 2021 with an update on the Safe City strategy, its scope, and what we've accomplished in data and digital platforms. And this concludes the presentation. Our recommendation would be to accept the report.
Thank you very much for the report. First question, I just want to ask because you just mentioned it. So the resources you're talking about here, I initially thought about resources as far as funding and the budget process. You're talking about staff resources here.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I would use that generically. We've had 2 staff members that started on this project, and before we got finished through kind of what you're seeing here is a number of projects that focus on data and digital platforms, but we don't have a systemic kind of approach to what's our strategy, what's our road prioritization, what's our roadmap, which is where we'd like to get to. So specifically, we've had 2 staff who have not been able to finish the strategy work, and that's what we're going to be focusing on. First and foremost is to get a dedicated person on board to focus on this.
Is there work to pick up that was completed that for the person that we do get on doesn't have to start from scratch?
Yes, yeah. Well, there's a number of interview work with the different departments that we did, and their perspectives on what would be important, what would be lesser important. So we do have work to leverage.
Okay. I'll pass it over to my colleagues. Vice Mayor Jones.
Thank you, Chair, and Dolan, you were absolutely correct. I've been waiting for this for the whole time I've been on the council for 5 years, so thank you for bringing it to us. A couple of quick questions. One is, have we started doing any work on the ROI? I mean, based on what you presented, I mean, we're have some significant savings in terms of time as well as service improvement. Are we able to quantify that at all? So when we go back to try to get you more resources or, additional support, if we can have a framework of where we were able to quantify the results.
Yeah, I think that'd be a good question for Ryan. I don't know if this has been active and operational enough to be able to quantify all of that. But Ryan, I don't know if you've been able to quantify any savings so far.
So we did with our central emergency vehicle preemption project. So we benefited from arriving on scene quicker. So there's obviously benefits from that, from life savings, but we don't see an actual savings from resources as far as personnel savings, because the level of complexity to put these platforms and support them then goes up into an analytical level as opposed to just moving widgets on the IT side. Mm-hmm. So it gives us also visibility into our business practices. So then we would need staff to then look at how we can change processes to even be more efficient. So I'm not sure if we're actually going to be saving or quantifying an ROI as opposed to identifying, oh, well, we do see anomalies here, and then have projects and initiatives surrounding that to actually make improvement.
Right. And when I say ROI, I'm not talking only about saving money, but right. Also the benefits or the outcomes of what we're doing. So a good example would be, because of the faster response time, maybe we saved 10 additional lives, or
right. So there is a couple
just quantifying,
yeah.
Not just monetarily, but mm-hmm. also in terms of the benefits of this.
So I think we can do that because there are statistics as far as when you arrive on scene, what the survivability rate mm-hmm. actually increases. So we haven't done that work. The one level, we can see our response times actually going down, and we have, as a result, been able to get reimbursed for the county for making their compliance requirements. So there is a monetary side to that, which we do have those numbers.
Right.
But we haven't put it to the survivability rate and what the impact is on that.
I'm already a true believer, so you don't have to convince me, but I know that there are some folks who are skeptical in terms of the investment in these technologies and what the outcomes or benefits are going to be. So I just any tool or anything that we have in our toolkit to be able to show the value that we're creating will make our jobs easier in terms of getting resources.
Yeah, and Vice Mayor, where the city is kind of heading with this at a higher level is, if you remember the tech deployment audit that we've been talking about recently, part of institutionalizing those standards and those practices around a project charter includes are we driving more efficient services or effective services or both? And what's the value and how are we going to measure that? And having that project managers in place to enforce that rigor and actually calculate that. I think you'll be seeing more and more of that actually occurring within the city. So at a higher level, not specific to this project, but other ones, that's where we're taking that audit recommendation and implementing that so we can actually come back with the ROI, the cost benefit risk over time of these technology investments.
Great. Next question is, I love the business intelligence, but what's the roadmap in terms of predictive analytics? And particularly around taking a divergent set of data sets and using predictive analytics to identify trends or patterns so that we can be ahead of a particular issue. And you know, to say maybe there's things outside of just, say, the fire department, maybe code enforcement data and data from other, the police department, that might in and of themselves not have any meaning, but if you combine them with other data sets, then they can predict and show a pattern of something that's about to happen.
Yeah, so I'll answer that in two ways. One is that there is a predictive missions RFP that the police, we talked about, that the police is going out to RFP, which will have predictive analytics in it. So that's within one set of data sets at a higher level as you start to look across like fire and police and emergency management, which you've talked about before. Interesting part to what Councilmember Prowlis had asked about, do we have any findings from some of the previous work? And some of the findings from the previous work are indicating that departments need to get their data a little more consolidated, a little more validated before we start sharing the data. So it was kind of, we may need to spend a little bit more time getting brilliant at the basics within the departments before we start integrating data across the departments, because we'll be integrating data that's not necessarily accurate or not necessarily consolidated in a way that it'll be an effective deployment. But that is part of the Safe City strategy, is to look at integrating and consolidating data across disparate data sources, not just within one functional domain like fire.
Well, I'm looking forward to it. Hopefully it's not going to be another 5 years. We'll be able to see at least while I'm still in office.
If the staff stay with us, we'll get it done.
All right, fantastic. Thank you, guys.
Councilmember Arenas?
Thank you. And actually, I was going to ask a question along the same lines in terms of the predicting some of the trends by using some of this analytics. And you just heard our conversation about our sexual assault and some of the work that it takes to get all of this data collected. Is there any thought into doing some of this collection of data in this format for our police department? I know that you're using it for predictive missions, but that's a little different. How about on an ongoing basis for the type of data that we hear here at PISFIS?
Yeah, I think I'd actually ask the police department, Judy, to be able to come on down and talk about what is going on and what's not going on.
Yeah, I completely heard that when you're one off, like one number off, and having to go back in Excel, I think you can't quantify that, but it's worth a headache is what it's worth, right? So saving all that time and resources is definitely a benefit.
Hi, I'm Judy Tirico, Deputy Director for the Police Department, Bureau of Technical Services. To answer your question, during the RFP process, those are going to be several of the questions that we're going to look at, whether it can be property, sexual assaults, and other of the violent crimes. So those will be some of the requirements that we will ask some of our vendors to see what their analytics suite will be able to deliver.
Oh, is that right? So then you'll ask about these. You said specifically property, sexual crimes, violent crimes.
We will
among
ask
others?
what their abilities are and what their recommendations are, if what should be in the inclusion. But we're going to be looking at a slew of different vendors and what the best practices are and cities and current standards and recommendations.
Okay, and that falls under the predictive missions, or because I know that you have an RFP there, or is that just in general?
It's part of that predictive analytics RFP.
Great. Yeah, I was concerned about that last predictive missions, I think the format that you all had presented previously, I think maybe about a year ago or so. I think there were some concerns from the community in possibly over-policing certain areas if you relied just on calls or on some crime alone, right? Just one set of indicators.
Understood. Part of the algorithm, under treatment in certain areas, over treatment in that. But that
Yes.
was part of the algorithm that ultimately is developed by that vendor upon recommendations that take in several different time of day, weather, school, all kinds of different things. But also, of course, we're looking for it being fair and equitable.
Yes. Thank you. In particular, I'm thinking about sexual crimes and trying to figure out why is it that these crimes are happening more to our children under the age of 14. Now, we tried, I think, through the University of Texas to have a study. It just, it wasn't, I think the time or the effort wasn't expansive enough to answer that question, but I'm hoping that maybe some analytics will help be part of the answer or help us lead into some of what the answer is there so that we can have the right strategies for those communities that are impacted. So I look forward to seeing what this RFP comes out to be. Thank you.
You're welcome.
And that was the end of my questions, Chair. I don't know that I had any others aside from just being very impressed with the dashboards that you showed and the level of efficiency that is going to allow staff to have. And so congratulations. Great work. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I'll echo the thanks and congratulations, Dolan. You said it. This is huge. This business intelligence tool is really a great time saver, great opportunity. Puts all this important data in the hands of many more people at such a more easily accessible way, and with limited resources now, right, of just people power going into it. But yet, yeah, it did take some time, right, to get there. But I think this is going to be invaluable as we move forward. And I would agree that I think the next step, as you had laid out, of maybe sort of laying out that roadmap and then determining where else, right, we see opportunities for the smart city strategy, right, to really be able to implement. And as Councilmember Arenas just pointed out, we have that conversation just now with the difficulties as well with the police department, right, on compiling data. And that can be said for any really department, right, that where you force an actual human being to go through and mine that data and pull together and compile reports and print them or email them, right, and distribute. This business intelligence tool is a tremendous feat and example. And so I do look forward to maybe celebrating that somehow. I know that we have our Smart City Committee, but I know that, I don't know if there's going to be some presentation of this in the future at council. And if not, I do think that though that it is worthy of some recognition, be it from the city manager's office or some sort of highlighting, right? That just really, I think the feat that we have here, I think it's definitely valuable.
Yeah, we'll look into that. We've been challenged with making sure that we don't have one effort report to two committees.
Yeah.
Right, and we actually talked about that a little bit a couple months ago. So we'll figure out the best way to celebrate it and get back to you.
Okay, great. And I didn't have any other questions besides wondering when Reggie transferred over to PD. But I know you always, you probably always wanted to be a police officer, Reggie. So that's totally fine.
I apologize. Sorry if I substituted police for fire. I didn't even know I did it.
You should have seen the smile on his face. He was glowing. Okay, no other comments. We don't have any speakers from the public on this item. So if we get a motion to approve and a second, all those in favor say aye. Motion passes. Nobody here for public comments, so our meeting's adjourned. Thank you.